Your $150,000 RV is not an asset. It is a hole in your retirement bucket leaking $2,000 every month. It sits idle. You are asset rich but cash poor, clinging to depreciating toys that steal your freedom. Most people work 40 years to buy things that own them. I'm King, and I am an equity strategist focused on radical simplification. In this video, I provide the Clean Slate Map, a specific formula to identify which pleasure assets are financial parasites and how you can convert them into a lifetime of guaranteed cash flow. If you want a retirement defined by experiences rather than maintenance schedules, hit subscribe and like now. Now, let's look at the math most people are too afraid to do on a Sunday morning. You see the Class A motorhome sitting on the dealer's lot, gleaming under the floodlights, and you see a ticket to freedom. You see open roads and sunset vistas, but if you look closer, through the lens of a cold, hard balance sheet, you aren't looking at a vehicle. You are looking at a controlled demolition of your net worth. Here is the logic anchor you need to internalize before you sign that dotted line. The moment you drive that rig off the lot, you lose 20% of its value. That is not a transaction fee. That is a massive immediate evaporation of your capital. If you paid $400,000, $80,000 just vanished into the ether before you even hit the first highway off-ramp. And the bleeding doesn't stop there. You are looking at a depreciation curve that swallows another 10% of the remaining value every single year. You are essentially paying a luxury tax for the privilege of owning an asset that hates your bank account. Most people focus on the sticker price, but you have to focus on the ghost expenses. These are the silent parasites that eat your portfolio from the inside out. You have to pay for specialized insurance because a standard policy won't cover a house on wheels. You have to pay for climate-controlled storage because if you leave that machine in the sun or the snow, the seals dry out and the electronics fail. You have to pay for specialized maintenance, where a simple oil change requires a technician with a different set of credentials and a significantly higher hourly rate. You have to pay for registration fees that feel more like a second mortgage than a government sticker. Now, let's apply some psychological math to the opportunity cost. You think you are spending money, but you are actually killing your future income. Imagine a retiree who decides to sell a $200,000 boat. If you take that money and park it in a conservative 5% yield instrument, you are suddenly looking at $10,000 in annual passive income. But that's only half the story. By offloading that boat, you are also saving $15,000 in annual upkeep, fuel, docking fees, and winterization. That is a $25,000 total swing in your lifestyle capacity. You haven't just saved money, you have fundamentally shifted your financial gravity. You have turned a $15,000 drain into a $10,000 gain. That is the difference between worrying about your monthly burn rate and living with a surplus. We need to look at the utilization metric. You have to calculate your cost per hour of actual enjoyment. Most luxury assets sit idle 90% of the time. When you break down the annual cost of ownership, the depreciation, the maintenance, and the lost interest, and divide it by the nights you actually sleep in that motorhome, the numbers are staggering. You will often find that you are paying more per night for a plastic shower and a cramped kitchenette in a parking lot than you would for a 5-star hotel suite in Paris. You are paying for the liability of ownership without receiving the premium experience of true luxury. You are tethered to a depreciating box, while the person at the Ritz has zero long-term liability and a concierge at their beck and call. This brings us to the rule of 100. It's a simple, brutal logic gate for your life. If an asset doesn't provide a 100% utility match to your daily existence, it is a drag on your portfolio's terminal value. If you aren't using it every day, or if it doesn't solve a fundamental problem in your life every single hour, it is an anchor, not a sail. You have to ask yourself, is this asset serving me, or am I serving the asset? Most people spend their best years working to maintain things they rarely use. They become caretakers for their own liabilities. You have to decide if you want to be the person who owns the view, or the person who is stuck paying for the window. Logic dictates that you choose the income over the overhead every single time. Stop buying things that depreciate and start buying the time those things were supposed to represent. That is how you win the game. You have spent 40 years building a vault. You called it a career, you called it an investment strategy, and you called it providing for the future. But look at where you are now. You are standing in the middle of a magnificent wine cellar surrounded by the finest vintages money can buy. Thousands of bottles, dust-covered and aging, representing decades of your sweat and sacrifice. Here is the problem. You are thirsty, yet you are terrified to pull a single cork. You tell yourself you are waiting for a special occasion. You tell yourself the market isn't right to sell the cellar. You tell yourself that the value is in the possession, not the consumption. This is the fundamental trap of the high net worth retiree. You have spent your entire life in the accumulation phase, and your brain has been hardwired to believe that more is the only metric of success. But now you have entered the utilization phase, and your hardware is glitching. You are treating your life like a museum when you should be treating it like an experience. You are worshiping the bottle while dying of thirst. Let's talk about Robert. Robert was a brilliant structural engineer. He understood load-bearing walls and the physics of tension. When he retired, he did what every successful man in his zip code did. He bought a 40-foot sailboat. He called it the second act. He imagined himself as a modern-day explorer. Wind in his hair, grandkids laughing on the deck. But that's not what happened. Within 6 months, the sailboat wasn't a vessel for adventure. It was a floating list of chores. Every Saturday morning, you would find Robert at the marina, not sailing but scrubbing salt off the fiberglass. He was chasing down engine leaks. He was arguing with the harbor master about slip fees. He was spending more time with a wrench than with his family. His hobby had become a part-time job that he was paying for the privilege of doing. Robert was an engineer who had spent his life optimizing systems, yet he couldn't see that his life had become fundamentally inefficient. He was a janitor for his own ego. He kept the boat because he had worked 30 years to afford it, not because he actually enjoyed being on the water. This is the sunk cost fallacy in its most lethal form. You feel this too. You feel the weight of the things you own. You look at that 5-bedroom house where 3 rooms haven't been entered in 6 months, and you feel a pang of guilt. You think about the effort it took to buy that house. You remember the late nights at the office, the missed recitals, the stress of the mortgage. Because you paid so much in life currency for these things, you feel that selling them is an admission of defeat. You think you are giving up your status. Here is the psychological math you are missing. The value of an asset is not what you paid for it in 1995. The value of an asset is how much it enhances your life today, in this moment. If an object requires more maintenance than it provides joy, it is no longer an asset. It is a liability. You aren't giving up when you downsize, you are trading up for the only currency that matters now, time and lightness. Imagine you are standing at the base of a mountain. This is the final trek of your life, the one that leads to the summit of peace and clarity. You are wearing a high-tech, expensive backpack. Inside that backpack, you have packed everything you've ever earned. You've packed the mahogany desk from your old office. You've packed the fine china you only use on Christmas. You've packed the heavy weight of a 4,000 square foot lawn. You start climbing, and you realize you are exhausted. You are looking at the ground, gasping for air, while the view behind you is spectacular. Most people never reach the summit. They collapse halfway up the trail, clutching their heavy bags, proud of how much they managed to carry. But you have a choice. You can drop the rocks. You can unbuckle the straps of more and feel the sudden jarring lightness of enough. To reach the summit of a peaceful retirement, you must drop the rocks you're carrying. You have to realize that the mountain doesn't care about your net worth. Gravity is the only law that remains undefeated, and gravity loves a heavy pack. This brings us to the golden handcuffs of luxury. Perhaps you have a condo in a city you no longer visit, or a vacation home that requires a 12-hour flight and a week of maintenance every time you arrive. It's beautiful. It's prestigious. It's also a tether. It keeps you anchored to a past version of yourself, the version that needed to prove something to the world. Every time you pay the property taxes on a place you don't use, you are paying a holding fee for your own ghost. You are keeping a seat at a table for a person you no longer are. You have to stop viewing letting go as a loss. You are not losing a house, you are gaining a horizon. You are not losing a boat, you are gaining your Saturdays. You are not losing your status, you are gaining your soul. Here's the thing, you can't explore new horizons if you are still guarding the old ones. You can't enjoy the taste of the wine if you're too afraid to break the seal. The cellar was built for the celebration, and the celebration is happening right now. It is time to stop being the curator of your own history and start being the lead character in your own present. Drop the weight, open the bottle, start the climb. Welcome to the engine room. This is Pulse 2, the tactical roadmap. We are moving past the theoretical and diving straight into the liquidation protocol. This isn't about downsizing in the way your parents talked about it. This is a surgical strike on your balance sheet. You are the surgeon, and your lifestyle is the patient. We are going to cut away the necrotic tissue of high-maintenance ownership to make room for the high-octane life of liquid freedom. Step 1 is the joy versus cost audit. You need to pull up a spreadsheet and list every single asset you own with a valuation over $10,000. I'm talking about the RV, the lake house, the boat, the vintage car, and that collector-grade watch collection. Now, you're going to assign 2 numbers to each item on a scale of 1 to 10. The first number is your happiness score. How much genuine, visceral joy does this item bring you when you actually use it? The second number is your drain score. This is the monthly metabolic cost of owning it. The insurance, the storage, the maintenance, the taxes, and most importantly, the mental bandwidth of worrying about it. Here is the math. If an asset has a happiness score of 6 and a drain score of 8, you don't own that asset. That asset owns you. It is a parasite on your potential. You have to be ruthless here. Most people keep things because they've tied their identity to the ownership of the object. You have to detach. You have to realize that a boat is just a hole in the water you throw money into, and an RV is just a depreciating fiberglass box that spends 50 weeks a year gathering dust and bird droppings. If the happiness to drain ratio is upside down, that item is slated for immediate liquidation. Step 2 is the market exit strategy. This is where most people fail because of their ego. You see a boat in the blue book valued at $80,000, so you list it for $80,000 and wait for a serious buyer. You wait 6 months. During those 6 months, you pay for dockage, insurance, and a winterization service. You lose the opportunity cost of having that cash invested. You are essentially paying a premium to stay stuck. Here is the psychological math you need to adopt. A quick sale at 90% of market value is mathematically superior to a 6-month wait for 100%. When you factor in the carrying costs and the immediate reinvestment potential of that capital, the 90% sale wins every single time. You aren't losing 10%, you are buying back 6 months of your life and stopping the bleeding. You price it to move. You want to be the most attractive option on the market so you can exit the transaction and move your capital into the retirement income bucket immediately. Step 3 addresses the timeshare trap. This is the Alcatraz of real estate. You were sold a dream of perpetual vacations, but what you actually bought was a perpetual liability. You have to realize that the resale market for timeshares is often a race to the bottom. Sometimes literally a $1 listing on eBay just to escape the maintenance fees. You have 2 avenues. First, check the resale forums like 2G or Red Week to see if there is any residual value. If not, you move to the legal exit strategy. There are specialized firms that focus exclusively on contract termination. It might cost you a fee up front, but you have to look at that fee as a ransom payment to free your future self from tens of thousands of dollars in escalating annual dues. You pay the ransom, you break the contract, and you never look back. Step 4 is the reallocation. This is the pivot. We take the proceeds from your liquidation, the cash from the boat, the RV, and the sold assets, and we move them into a laddered bond portfolio or low-cost index funds. We are building the travel fund. Here is the cinematic metaphor. Instead of owning the theater, you are buying a front row ticket to every show. Think about the logic of the rental model. If you sell a $200,000 RV, you can take the 5% yield from that cash and have $10,000 a year in free money. You use that $10,000 to rent the newest, highest-end RV model for 2 weeks a year. You get the best of both worlds. You get the RV experience, you smell the new leather, you use the latest technology, and then this is the best part, you hand the keys back to the owner and walk away. You don't worry about the tires, you don't worry about the engine, and you definitely don't worry about the 50 weeks of depreciation. You are consuming the experience without owning the headache. Finally, we have to talk about the tax man. You cannot ignore the tax implications of these sales. If you are selling a second home or an investment property, you are looking at a massive capital gains hit. You have to be smarter than the average seller. You look at a 1031 exchange if you want to swap into a different type of income-producing property, or you play the primary residence card. If you move into that second home and make it your primary residence for at least 2 of the 5 years before you sell, you can qualify for the Section 121 exclusion, shielding up to $500,000 of gain if you're married. You have to treat your taxes like a chess game. You don't just sell, you strategize the exit. You time your sales to offset gains with losses. You use the math to protect your harvest. Most people spend their lives accumulating stuff because they think it defines their success. But true success in this stage of the game is defined by liquidity. Liquidity is the fuel for your freedom. You are clearing the runway so your retirement can actually take flight. You are trading the heavy, static weight of things for the light, dynamic energy of experiences. That is the Liquidation Protocol. It's cold, it's calculated, and it's the only way to ensure that your golden years are actually spent living rather than just maintaining. Now we reach the most difficult part of the entire equation. This isn't about the numbers on your spreadsheet, it is about the software running in your head. You have spent 4 decades being an owner. You owned your career, you owned your home, you owned your reputation, and you owned the relentless stress that came with all of it. But to win the final act of this game, you must undergo a radical identity shift. You have to transition from being an owner to being a user. I want you to adopt the mindset of what I call the strategic simpleton. Most people hear the word simpleton and think of someone who lacks intelligence. But the strategic simpleton is the smartest person in the room because he has figured out how to decouple his status from his stuff. The strategic simpleton owns almost nothing, yet he has access to everything. He doesn't own the mountain house, he rents the best view for 2 weeks and lets someone else worry about the leaking roof. He doesn't own the boat, he charters the experience and walks away the moment the engine starts smoking. He understands that ownership is just a polite word for an obligation. Here is the psychological math you are currently ignoring. You are likely falling into the one last summer trap. You look at your assets and you tell yourself just 1 more year. You think you are being sentimental. You think you are being cautious. But here is the reality. You are trading your highest quality health years for the maintenance of a depreciating asset. You are trading your mobility for a storage unit with a view. Every year you delay your simplification is a year of prime energy. You will never get back. You are choosing to be a glorified property manager for your own liabilities. You have to realize that your worth is not tied to the size of your garage. Your worth is not tied to the length of your boat. Your worth is not tied to the number of guest rooms you have to vacuum every Sunday. Most people spend their lives collecting keys only to realize at the end that those keys have become handcuffs. You think those keys represent power, but they actually represent weight. You have to sell the drag. You have to buy the time. You have to enjoy the freedom. The richest person isn't the one who has the most. The richest person is the one who needs the least to be happy. If you can't be happy without the inventory, you aren't successful. You are just a host for your possessions. You have worked too hard to spend your retirement years as a curator of your own museum. You have earned the right to be light. You have earned the right to be mobile. You have earned the right to be free. If you are ready to stop managing things and start managing your happiness, if you are ready to simplify your life and reclaim your time, I want you to comment the word freedom below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our community of strategic retirees. I'm King, and I'll see you in the next video.